Hey, everybody. Welcome to All There Is. I'm your host, Kelly Bargabas. You know, this podcast is all about sharing the human experience so that we can connect, shift paradigms, and expand our universe through words, right? And so today I want to share an experience that I had about 2 months ago. And it was one of those things that has stayed with me. And I'm sure you know what I mean, right? It was unexpected and profound. And I can't stop thinking about it. And I love it when you go around your day or about your night, unsuspecting that anything special is going to happen that day, but then boom, the universe intervenes. And that is exactly what happened when I met Livier Lazaro from the Don Diego VFW Post 7420 in San Diego. I was in San Diego for work, and my husband Craig came with me, and every night we enjoyed going out and finding new restaurants. Of course, we visited some of our old favorite places. You know, Craig lived there for a really long time. I lived there for about 5 years. Before we even checked into our hotel room, we were out having tacos at Tacos El Gordo downtown, and we were having a great time. And my coworkers kept telling me about this new restaurant called Chichilla, and it's in the Barrio Logan neighborhood of downtown San Diego. And Craig and I were very familiar with Barrio Logan. We actually love that neighborhood. And when we lived in San Diego, we went there often. The Northgate Market had the best ceviche. In fact, that's one of the things we miss the most now living in upstate New York. And I've tried to mimic the recipe and make my own ceviche because we just loved it so much. And I'm close. I'm almost there. And then we would go to El Popo all the time. And unfortunately, they didn't make it out of COVID, so we weren't able to visit that place. But on this Thursday night, we went to Chichilla to see what it was all about. And honestly, the restaurant experience was underwhelming. It was really crowded. We were kind of seated in a corner in a makeshift overflow room upstairs. It was uncomfortable and awkward, and the food was meh. But we had a nice time despite the circumstances. We usually do. And then after dinner, we wanted to walk for a few blocks before we Ubered back to our hotel. A few blocks up the street on the corner, Craig spotted a VFW post that he'd never been to before. He's a veteran and a member of the American Legion, so he loves to visit them wherever we go. And, you know, we're both always up for new experiences, so I said, why not? And on a random Thursday night, we walked into the Don Diego VFW Post 7420 to see what was up. And sometimes when you walk in these private clubs, like even an American Legion or a VFW, it can sometimes feel very cliquey and private and unwelcoming to strangers and newcomers. And it can be one of those experiences when you open the door and everyone turns around to look at you to say, who's that? You kind of get the stink eye and you don't feel very welcome. But we did not feel that at the Don Diego Post. Like almost immediately, it had a very welcoming vibe. The bartender was cool and friendly. And, you know, we sat down and ordered a drink and started a conversation with her. And she began telling us about the post and about the commander. And she mentioned that she loved to give tours of the place, which we were immediately interested in and intrigued. We're always up to learn about interesting things, so we were up for a tour of the place. Then she mentioned how the commander's life's passion was committed to deported veterans and bringing them home. And when she said that, Craig and I both had a moment of, wait, what? Deported veterans? What do you mean? Who's deporting veterans and why? We were so confused. And, you know, it's embarrassing even to tell you that we were so ignorant about it. But of course, we're familiar with all of the political drama and headlines around the borders and immigration. But we hadn't really heard of deported veterans and that it was a thing. I'm not even sure I knew that non-citizens could serve in the military. Now, Craig was in the military, so he knew that. He served with some non-citizens, but I just never really thought about it, to be quite honest. And the bartender explained some to us because she could see our confused looks on our faces, but she encouraged us to wait until the commander came out to meet us and she would explain everything. And so Livier Lazaro did, in fact, come over to introduce herself. She gave us a tour of the Post's back room. Now, this room I believe they call it their Wall of Honor or their Hall of Heroes. And this room that they have set up in the back of this VFW actually recognizes 61 Hispanic American Congressional Medal of Honor recipients. So it was like this museum or Hall of Fame of sorts of members of the military, most of them, if not all of them, Hispanic American. Their history, really medal recipients throughout time, from the Civil War to present day. This VFW Post itself, 7420, originated in 1955 when Mexican Americans from the Logan Heights district were not allowed in other VFW posts. So they started their own. Good for them. Even though they had served this country. Isn't that maddening, but not surprising? That's when this VFW post was started. And it's also worth mentioning that the commander, Livier Lazaro, or Livy as I think she goes by, is the first female commander of that post. And herself is a 20-year retired veteran of the Army. And if my memory serves, she was a master sergeant. So she was a very formidable and passionate woman with a smile that lit up when talking about her members and the soldiers who've been honored there. And we were honored to meet her. And so this Wall of Fame in the back room that she showed us, it informed us and celebrated soldiers who hadn't been properly recognized for their service. One particular soldier that stands out is one who earned a medal in World War II, I think it was, but wasn't awarded that medal until Obama was president. So many of the members of the military who've served, who are people of color, haven't been properly recognized in history. They haven't been properly recognized with the medals that they earned and deserved. So this Wall of Fame and Hall of Heroes was really a tribute to them. And it was really educational for me and interesting. And like any memorials I've ever been to, it left me with a somber and awe-inspiring mood for sure. Sort of a weightiness of being in the presence of true heroes. And they also had a deported veteran mural and banners of people, real people, who were forced to leave this country after serving in its military. I'm talking about the United States. People who served in our military, and then they were forced to leave the country and deported. And like I said, I'm not sure I ever knew that non-citizens could serve and would serve in our country's military. That kind of blows my mind too. Like, they would sign up to put themselves in harm's way to defend our freedoms, and they're not even a citizen of this country. But they have, and they do. Legal residents with visas or green cards can enlist and volunteer to serve, and they've been doing it since the Revolutionary War. So even though my ignorance is embarrassing about this topic, on that random Thursday night at the Don Diego Post in Barrio Logan, Livy continued to tell us stories of real people, men and women, real veterans who've been asked to leave, kicked out of this country that they helped defend, and how she and other nonprofit organizations around the country are working tirelessly to bring them back, to repatriate them for citizenship, of course, but also for all the resources that our veterans deserve, like healthcare, like life-saving medical treatment, counseling, resources to help get them assimilated back into society after they serve. And of course, we do that today for our veterans if they are citizens. And she told us about this woman named Laura Meza. They were having a homecoming celebration in a few days. They were going to celebrate Laura's homecoming. She was an Army veteran who had served in Iraq, and after her service, she was deported to Costa Rica, and she has spent the last 16 years exiled there. And so just recently, this summer, she returned to the U.S. through the help of a program that was started at this Don Diego VFW post. So that's all the background. Now, let me give you some facts and some statistics in case, you're as uninformed as I was. I'll just give you some facts about this topic. I don't know if you know this, but I didn't. I didn't have this number at my fingertips. Less than 0.5% of our population joined the military. And last year, there were 1.3 million active duty personnel in the United States. Now, of that, how many are non-citizens? There are about 5,000 legal permanent residents who enlist every year. There could be as many as 45,000 immigrants or foreign-born members serving at any given time. And many of them have become citizens. but many don't. And why? Why is that happening? So apparently in 1996, I believe Clinton was president, the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act was passed, and the United States has deported thousands of non-citizen military veterans since then. Now, most of these veterans are generally childhood arrivals to the United States. They immigrated here when they were little, they grew up here, and they had legal permanent resident status. And then something happened, they get into legal trouble, and suddenly they have a criminal record. And that's where the deportation comes in. So I'm going to get back to that. How many have been deported? Well, it's really hard to measure and know for sure because the U.S. government has no official accounting of how many deported veterans remain overseas or exiled from this country because it failed to record these cases for many years. Right now, the government is estimating about 250. The organizations who are really fighting this battle and are in the trenches say there are currently thousands of veterans who have been deported to dozens of different countries, often because of a misdemeanor, which automatically means deportation if a person is not a citizen. And this is what happened in Laura Mesa's case, the one that I was talking about a few minutes ago. Many deported veterans like Mesa have attributed their crimes to PTSD, which affects those who served in the military at higher rates than the rest of us and the general public, right? That just makes sense. Of course, they deal with PTSD at the next level. Now, Laura Mesa immigrated to the U.S. from San Jose, Costa Rica in 1985. She was 5 years old. She grew up in Maryland. She graduated from a high school in Washington, D.C. She was awarded several certificates and was really honored for her academics and her leadership. And in 2001, she became a permanent U.S. resident. Now, 2 years later, she enlisted in the U.S. Army, and she was happy to have the opportunity to serve the country that she loved. But she also had some really dark times serving the U.S. military. When she was stationed in Germany, she was a victim of sexual assault and was raped by another soldier. She didn't report it, fearing retaliation, which we know is very common, especially in the military. And I know there's been some recent legislation about that, trying to address that problem. And then she was deployed to Iraq to support the 2003 invasion. So, of course, there she was on the front lines of war, bomb attacks. She saw fellow soldiers get killed. And, of course, when she came back to the U.S., she was a different person. She wasn't the same little girl who was celebrated for her leadership and her academics, right? Like, she had just been through hell. So she came back to the U.S., and in 2004, she was honorably discharged, and she was suffering from undiagnosed PTSD. She began to self-medicate with drugs, and she reported being raped a second time when she was here in Baltimore in 2005. And then, of course, following all of that trouble, there were legal troubles, several more arrests. She pleaded guilty in 2007 to attempted robbery, possession of marijuana with an intent to distribute, and she received a 30-day prison sentence for the marijuana offense, as well as a 2-year suspended sentence for the robbery conviction. And she served her time in prison, as she should. You know, I'm a firm believer you have to be held accountable for your actions, regardless of what's happening, and she was held accountable. But unlike the rest of us citizens who get into trouble, she was arrested by ICE, which detained her for over a year and ultimately deported her to Costa Rica in January 2009. You know, she was separated from her family, from her daughter and her mother, and it has taken her all this time from 2009 to 2023 to get back here. There's a similar story with a man named Alfredo Garcia, who volunteered to serve in the Army during Vietnam. He served with honor, and upon his return, had trouble facing some demons. And like many veterans, he turned to alcohol to help ease his pain, and then ran into some trouble with the law. And these infractions with the law, coupled with his immigration status, led to him being deported to Mexico in 2005. He was exposed to Agent Orange when he was in Vietnam, had severe PTSD from combat, and since he was deported and being denied the services and the care that veterans should get. He's been chronically homeless and slowly becoming blind. And he relies on the charity of his family to keep him housed in a room. He's really suffering. So these are some of the stories that I heard that night of real people who have served our country. So you may be asking yourself, why should we care? Why should we care about deported veterans? After my experience that night at the VFW Post, I was talking about it to everybody I met. The next day, I went to my friend's house and said, hey, did you know we deport veterans? And I've been telling everybody about it. And most people have the same reaction that Craig and I had, which is like, wait, what? What did you say? Deported veterans? How's that possible? And then once you explain, like, oh yeah, we let non-citizens serve. But most people are just as shocked as I am. How could we deport our veterans? I have had a couple of people react with, well, they volunteered. Last time I checked, we didn't have a draft. Or, well, what did they do? It must have been really bad if we deported them. Or, they shouldn't have broke the law. What do they expect? How do we know they were wrongfully deported? I would propose that all deportation of a veteran should be wrong, regardless of what they did. Just like any other veteran. They should pay for their crimes, 100%. They should be held accountable for whatever they're doing. If it's against the law, they need to go to jail or prison, whatever. They should pay for their crimes. But stay here in this country that they help defend. And why do people like Livier Lazaro at the VFW Post and all of the other organizations around the country have to engage to fight this battle? Why isn't the government taking care of their own? If they were of good enough moral character to represent us in the military, why doesn't that alone earn them citizenship? Oftentimes, the promise of citizenship is made to non-citizen service members as an important recruitment tool. But then the U.S. government doesn't carry through to make sure that that happens before they are discharged. And to me, if we are allowing people to sign up to serve, to be put on the front lines, it's a moral imperative embedded in our history and our values and our laws that if you are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for America, you are and should be entitled to be an American. If you are willing to die for this country, you should be entitled to live in this country as a citizen. And by the way, it's not uncommon for veterans to have legal trouble. 1 in 3 of the nation's 19 million veterans have been arrested and jailed at least once, and more than 180,000 are behind bars right now. Former service members and veterans make up nearly 8% of our state prison population and 5% of our federal prison population. It's not surprising, right? It's a demographic that is dealing with severe PTSD and trauma and addiction and trying to re-assimilate after living through the horrors of war and also just life happening. It's just a numbers game. But here's what I don't get. Regardless of political party or who is in the White House, it's hard to find disagreement that those who put their lives on the line for the rest of us should be honored. They should hold a place of respect and admiration. And as a country, we've done a better job of that in the last 30 years or so. We've put them in their rightful place in our society. But like so many things in our country, we hold back if they don't check all the boxes. So we honor veterans at all costs, but only if they're one of us. Only if they look like us. Only if they were born here. We don't deport other veterans who commit crimes. We don't deport our citizens. We don't deny them health care or ask them to leave the country they served. And we shouldn't. That would be horrifying. We should be supporting veterans at that level. But we should be supporting all veterans. So what is my point in sharing this today? Well, my goal was to make you aware of this issue. It was a surprise to me. So I'm guessing that maybe there's other people out there who are surprised by this as well. And I wanted to share this human experience because it's happening for some among us. There are people suffering. And that's what All There Is all about. I believe that awareness is the first step towards understanding, and only then can we have empathy and offer help to those who are experiencing things like this in life, to offer help to people who are suffering. And so now that you know this, what can you do? With some simple searches on the internet. Go to Google and search deported veterans or repatriating veterans. Check out the Facebook page for the Don Diego VFW Post. And you can read and see the stories for yourself. There are many of them out there, and it is worth your time, I promise. And if you get the opportunity to weigh in on this issue, spread the word, vote, do the right thing. If you're a vet and you're a member of the American Legion or the VFW, bring this issue to the forefront. There are a couple of websites that I came across in addition to the Don Diego VFW Facebook page. There's the League of United Latin American Citizens, and they're at the forefront of this fight and this effort. And that's LULAC.org, LULAC.org. I also came across the Black Deported Veterans Association, and that is BDVA.us. And they really focus on this. And again, this isn't just happening for Hispanic Americans or Mexican Americans. I think I read somewhere that we have veterans deported to 15 different countries. This really is an American issue. There has been some good news and positive movement lately, and if you look up the Veteran Service Act and follow that, that's where we've had some positive movement thanks to the efforts of these advocacy organizations and people like Livy who are dedicated to this mission. And not only do they work tirelessly to bring individuals home, to bring these people back to America, they pay travel expenses, they pay legal costs, they try to get them medical care and help them find their pathway to citizenship, but they're also trying to get legislation passed. So the Veteran Service Recognition Act passed the House last year, and in July it was just reintroduced in the Senate. And what this act will do is create a system for the Department of Homeland Security to identify non-citizens who may be veterans, and before deportation proceedings are started against a non-citizen, they have to consider their veteran status in their service. They're not asking for a free pass, they just want their military service to count for something before we kick them to the curb. The bill also requires U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and the Department of Defense to make opportunities for military recruits and veterans to obtain U.S. citizenship, to basically make it a little easier for it to happen so that they're not just lumped in with everybody else who's seeking citizenship. If they served our country, they should be at the front of the line. We should make it easy for them to become citizens, right? So there's been some great strides and some big wins recently, but there is more to be done, and hundreds who need to come back home. And honestly, we just need to stop this practice of deporting people who have served in our military. Now, I also had someone say to me, well, if you give them citizenship for serving in the military, we'll have all kinds of people signing up to serve in the military just to become a citizen. And, like that one statistic I shared, less than 0.5% of our population serve in the military. So I don't think we need to be worried about our country being overrun. Again, these are people who were already here in our country. They were legal permanent residents. They grow up here. They're members of society. They're educated here, and they join the military. That is the typical profile in the story. And I believe if you are willing to put your life on the line for this country, you should get your citizenship. I'm an auxiliary member of the Sylvan Beach American Legion Post 1153 myself. My sister and I just joined recently under my father's service. He's a Marine. And as I was preparing for this episode, the August newsletter from the American Legion was on my desk, and the front page had a quote, which I thought was perfect for this episode. And it said this: "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And it was attributed to Martin Luther King Jr. Don't be silent on issues such as this. The silence of our friends. These are our friends who stood up for us, who went to battle for us, who are fighting for our freedom. We can't be silent on issues that are causing them to suffer. Speak up. Leave no one behind. This isn't an immigration issue. It's a veteran issue. It's about standing by those who stood up for us, those who've stood on the front line fighting for our freedom. It is about leaving no one behind. Most of us listening won't be called upon to gear up and go to war, to go overseas and be away from our home and family, to make the ultimate sacrifice. But we all benefit from it. And it's incomprehensible to me, unfathomable, immoral, that we can find ways to justify turning our back and abandoning those that we called friend when they wore our uniform. But once we were done with them, they were disposable. It shouldn't be this way. The U.S. military has made a sacred commitment to leave no one behind on the battlefield. This sentiment is even embedded in the Airman's Creed, right? I will never leave an airman behind. And the Soldier's Creed of I will never leave a fallen comrade. Leave no one behind is a very popular military sentiment. And as you all know from listening to this podcast, All There Is, and being familiar with my story, Chasing the Merry-Go-Round, one of my personal credos is that home is a place we all want to be. People spend their whole lives searching for home, yearning, working, building a home. And nothing speaks more about home than being willing to die to defend that home. What else do we need these people to prove before we let them stay and know that we want this to be their home too? They've proved themselves by putting on the uniform and going into battle and fighting for us. Like, what else do we need to know that they're committed to the United States and the American way of life? Don't be silent. In the end, we will remember not the words of enemies, but the silence of our friends. Let's not be silent on this issue. Speak up, follow this, share it, be informed. Do what you can to reach out to your senators. Make sure that the legislation gets passed. Leave no one behind. Leave no one behind. Thanks for listening today. I appreciate your time. I appreciate your open-mindedness. If you want to listen to past episodes of All There Is, go to kellybargabas.com. They're all out there. You can find them all on all the podcast platforms that you listen to. I would appreciate it if you would share it and like it and review it. And until we meet again, take care.